latest clash between India and China along the line of actual control. Last Friday, Chinese troops carried out an incursion into Indian territory and they attempted to cross the line of actual control near the Yangste border post in Tawang. This is in Arunachal Pradesh. It was clearly a bid to change the status quo along the eastern sector of the line of actual control. These Chinese soldiers were resisted by Indian troops that were deployed in the area. It led to a physical altercation between the two sides is what we know. And both Indian and Chinese soldiers suffered minor injuries, after which that situation de-escalated. Soon after, commanders from China and India carried out a flag meeting to restore status quo. The Defence Minister Rajnath Singh put out a lot of this information in that statement that he made in Parliament. He made a statement on this border clash. And this is what we got, addressing that clash between Indian and Chinese troops in the Tawang sector of Arunachal Pradesh. Rajnath Singh has said that the issue had been taken up with China through diplomatic channels. Listen into what he said exactly.
9 दिसंबर 2022 को पीएलए ट्रुप्स ने तवांग सेक्टर के यांगसे एरिया में लाइन ऑफ एक्चुअल कंट्रोल पर अतिक्रमण कर स्टेटस को एक तरफा बदलने का प्रयास किया। चाइना के इस प्रयास का हमारी सेना ने दृढ़ता के साथ सामना किया है अध्यक्ष महोदय, और इस फेस ऑफ में हाथापाई भी हुई है। भारतीय सेना ने बहादुरी से पीएलए को हमारी टेरिटरी में अतिक्रमण करने से रोका और उन्हें उनकी पोस्ट पर वापस जाने के लिए मजबूर कर दिया अध्यक्ष महोदय। इस झड़प में दोनों ओर के कुछ सैनिकों को चोटें भी आई हैं और मैं इस सदन को अवगत करा।
मैं इतना स्पष्ट कहना चाहता हूं कि भारतीय जनता पार्टी की सरकार है, नरेंद्र मोदी इसके प्रधानमंत्री है और जब तक भारतीय जनता पार्टी की मोदी सरकार चल रही है, 1 इंच जमीन पर भी कोई कब्जा नहीं कर सकता। कल अपने सेना के जवानों ने जो 8 की देर रात को और 9 की सुबह को जो वीरता दिखाई है, मैं इसकी भूरी प्रशंसा करता हूं। इन्होंने घुसे हुए सभी लोगों को कुछ ही घंटों में वापस खदेड़ दिया और हमारी भूमि का रक्षण किया है।
Let's put this in perspective now that these skirmishes are rising between India and China. Anil Truganayat is the former ambassador. Also joining us is Maruf Raza, consultant with us and strategic affairs expert. Meera Shankar is former ambassador to USA and Germany, and it's great to have you all with us this evening. Maruf, first to you, because after Doklam, after Galwan Valley, now the latest in Tawang, as far as the aggression showed by the Chinese, are you spotting the way in which they're going about it? Is there a trend that's emerging?
Well, to some extent, the Chinese intent, as we saw unfold during the Galwan standoff, and as we saw the other day, hasn't really changed. Because the Chinese have all along followed a strategy of what some people call salami slicing, some people call intruding and exploring the areas where they can lay control and claim later that they've always been there. And the third thing is that the Chinese wait and watch and choose an area which will allow them to make these sudden moves in large numbers. Now, this goes against what our foreign ministry has said from time to time, and even the foreign minister, the spirit of bilateral relations and peace and tranquility. Clearly, the Chinese are no mood for peace and tranquility with India. What they want is to have minor victories, which they can then trumpet to their people, that President Xi Jinping is continuing the strategy of settling China's claims over territories, which were first spelled out by Mao Zedong. Whether they are in Taiwan or the 5 fingers along the palm being Tibet, and the 5 fingers being Ladakh, Nepal, Bhutan, Sikkim, and Arunachal. And wherever they get a chance, they are going to try and explore the possibility of grabbing territory. And in those circumstances,
at a very crucial time, as far as China is concerned, Maruf, this is happening at a very crucial time. when actually you're seeing Xi Jinping rise in terms of the unprecedented kind of power situation that he enjoys in China. And of course, we have seen the civil unrest because of the COVID restrictions that were imposed. People were up in arms, and we saw them actually backtrack on the zero COVID policy. Meera Shankar, do weigh in on this. As far as the political and strategic objectives of China are concerned, with the kind of clashes that we are seeing between China and India right now, is there a connection that you see? Because as far as the objectives are concerned, how clearly defined do you think they are? Because very recently, Xi Jinping had instructed his army to be ready to fight and win wars.
Well, certainly, I think it's the stated policy of the Chinese government under Xi Jinping to actually exercise sovereignty over all the areas that they claim with other countries. So it means almost like a unilateral assertion of the border rather than negotiated settlements with other countries. Because if another country has a different perception of the border and there are conflicting claims, and your direction is to your troops, to your people, that you will reclaim everything that we claim and bring it under our sovereign control, then in effect, it's a unilateral assertion of the border, which will be sought to be acquired through force if necessary. And we are seeing that with India. There's a recurring pattern to these intrusions. We've seen, as you said, all the intrusions in the western sector near Ladakh with,
Yes.
Galwan,
Yes.
de-escalated, etc. Then now we have this major intrusion in the eastern sector in Yangste. It's not the first time that they have intruded, but apparently
Yes.
they have come in much larger numbers. And they have also attacked our post, as the defense minister said.
Yes.
Akraman.
Correct.
And then our soldiers beat them back. Last year, apparently in October 21, they had tried to occupy some heights in the Yangtze sector, and Indian soldiers had prevented this and also taken some Chinese soldiers prisoner.
Right.
In that sector for a few hours.
Yes.
And then, of course, peace was restored. And then,
Yes.
Yes,
so they have been happening from time to time. Like you said, there is a recurring pattern. Mr. Trigunayat,
Yes, but
has,
little bit
the
more.
question is, I'll come to you, Meera Shankar, but, I just want to figure out how India has been playing this. Has it, like the opposition is suggesting, has India been playing it softly with China? Is India behaving like it's business as usual, even as the frequency of these clashes is going up and they are upping the ante, as it were, like Meera Shankar was pointing out? The timing is also in question, like I said. We have had New Delhi kick off a series of events as part of its presidency of the G20, and the G20 includes China. In fact, PM Modi and Xi Jinping exchanged pleasantries there in Bali at the last G20 meeting too in November. So how has India been playing it, according to you? Have we been soft in our approach towards China, Mr. Trigunayat?
Well, I don't think so that we have been soft. In fact, this has been an eyeball-to-eyeball approach on the border since the time of Galwan. And even this time, if you come to think of it, we are very much there. We have been building infrastructure across the border. In the international fora, India has been clearly calling out China, whether it is the UN Security Council or otherwise. Our External Affairs Minister has been very categorical. Unless and until the border is resolved, there cannot be a business as usual. So that's precisely the situation. But at the end of the day, we are continuing with the policy of dialogue and diplomacy to resolve the situation, because that's how this is going to be eventually resolved. Now, as far as China is concerned, we know that it has hegemonistic tendencies. It considers India as a strategic rival, does not give it the kind of parity India deserves. But that is why when China sees that India acquiring an international profile, which has not been hitherto at this level, I mean, across the board, and obviously they are miffed. And secondly, they want to create these kind of a small coercion kind of tactics all the time to keep the destruction heavy. India engaged totally across the border and on the continental side, so that the at least strategically the maritime domain is somewhat left out, according to their calculations.
Sure.
On the other hand, like there have been these kind of skirmishes, and they keep on happening on the border at all the time because of the way the LAC has been monitored or being
But
observed by those.
are there
But
areas of differing perception about the LAC? Areas where
Yes.
both sides patrolling the area up to their respective claim lines, something that has been happening? And if so, why haven't moves been made to resolve perceptions? If there is disparity in perceptions, why hasn't a move been made to arrive at some sense of clarity? Has that even happened, Maruf?
Well, taking off from where the two distinguished ambassadors have left us, the first thing is, before I come to the boundaries perceptions, Chinese economy is not growing.
Yes.
And the Chinese leadership feels they need to give some deliverables on the table for the Chinese people to feel good, whether they are territorial gains, whether there are some other major strategic moves. And China is trying to make them in the maritime space, though there are limitations that China has. Now coming down to the boundary issue. You see, the boundary issue, and I'll be very blunt about it, it hasn't been settled, and I don't see it being settled in the near future for three reasons. Reason one is that both sides have dug their heels in on what their perceptions are. I keep saying boundary and I don't say border, because a border is something that is settled and demarcated. Here it's the boundary, and which is still in question, whether in Ladakh, what you call the LAC, and in Arunachal, what you call the McMahon line. And the Chinese have been a part of the McMahon line discussions in 1913-14, but they never fully agreed, because Mao Zedong's approach was whatever was agreed and decided before the Communist Party came into power is something that he will dismiss.
True.
So the Chinese have thereafter used selectively history to lay their claim on the South China Sea, because they were there in 223 BC. So the Chinese are a mixed bunch.
Correct.
The second thing is, as far as our position has been, it is dictated by a group called the China Study Group, which is made up of serving and retired diplomats, serving and retired military officers, and some academics, who basically have been giving out the terms to even the military that, try and keep it a bulletless border, so that we can manage the issue to the extent that we'll one day have talks. And that's my third point.
Yes.
Any amount of talks will not lead to anything with China. And I don't dismiss diplomacy, but I don't believe in it blindly either.
Sure.
Because we've had 24 rounds of special representative talks, and they've led to nothing.
And it hasn't helped. But incidentally, Maruf, the Tawang incident comes days after China has expressed objection to Operation Yudh Abhyas, and which is, of course, an India-US joint military exercise which took place in Auli in the Uttarakhand hills, and they claimed it was a violation of the border agreements of 1993 and 96. So perhaps this is reflective of changing equations that India has with global powers as well, and China may be taking exception to this. Would you agree with that, Meera Shankar?
Well, I think there are a variety of reasons why China would choose to escalate. One is their own internal issues, really, because Xi Jinping has faced unprecedented demonstrations over the restrictive approach, the zero COVID policy approach. And in fact, some of the demonstrators were actually calling for Xi Jinping to step down. So, and if you look at China, then there were three pillars of Chinese legitimacy, if one could call it that.
Correct.
One used to be ideology, the communist ideology, but that's really kind of been out of the window since the reforms initiated by Deng Xiaoping. Secondly, it used to be very rapid economic growth.
Right.
Now that economic growth is slowing.
Yes.
Third was nationalism. And so if you look at the three pillars which provided legitimacy,
But do you think that
to the
these kind of
Chinese government,
skirmishes
it's
in this
only the
sense is going to
third pillar.
continue? Since we are running out of time, I just want to know very quickly, Mr. Trigunayat, perhaps you can tell me if you think such skirmishes are going to continue happening, because the reasons that are being pointed out by Maruf, by Meera Shankar, those seem to be ongoing concerns as far as China is concerned. And of course, it has its expansionist ideologies as well.
Absolutely, they will continue, and this is not the end of it. And I always say LAC is line as per the Chinese. So you are always going to see that. We need to prepare for it and have our comprehensive power to confront the Chinese every which way possible.
Defense Minister and Amit Shah are reassuring us about. We will keep a watch on developments connected to this. But Meera Shankar, Mr. Trigunayat and Maruf Raza, thank you very much for joining us with your perspective on India development debate.